So, sorry I'm a little bit late, guys. I got distracted by a few things. Also missing cables and things like that. So, I've had to deal with that sort of thing and get that straightened out. I have a cord that has vanished on me, which is kind of annoying. But, I thought what I'd do for now, while I'm finishing waiting for a device to charge, and enough that it will stop giving me low battery warnings, is that first I'm going to have to move a few things a little bit. It looks like there. It's the best I can do. Hopefully, if I do this, you can see it. For those curious about what I read from, it's this big long thing is what gives me the Braille output. Right now it's giving me low battery, 13%, which I know about. This is why we're doing this way. That is a Braille display that I'm reading from, which is getting its information from a very old iPhone. It's either 5 or 5S, I don't remember, but this goes to show there are ways that if you have old tech like this, gosh, I'm thinking of it as old tech, there are ways that you can use this still. Like as a book reader, because it certainly has enough power to do that. So, the phone for some contrast, the phone that I'm using to do this on is an iPhone 6. Oops. Actually, no big deal, because I don't think anything was playing. But I accidentally hit what is usually the play and pause button on things. So.
Messages, now. Heather Schroeder, remind me what kind of toilet paper is ideal. Also, where do you usually get it?
I need to grab my phone real quick and send a message. I think you all probably just heard that. But, yeah, so, that's kind of what I do. How I do this. There's speech output on my phone. You may have heard that just now. That usually that's when I'm not using a Braille display, which I'm not on my 6S. That is what I use. 13. Enter passcode. Oh. 2 button. 2 5 button. 4 button. Told myself I was going to be a lot more prepared than I am today. Message Heather Schroeder. Schroeder. What do you want to say? Listen, button. Scott 1,000 sheets, comma. I usually get them at Walgreens, ellipsis, but, ellipsis. Okay, I'll send this. To Heather Schroeder. Messages. To Heather Schroeder. Message. Scott 1,000 sheets. I usually get them at Walgreens, but. So that's, now you're seeing kind of a little bit of how I deal with, that kind of thing as well. The battery is going up, thank goodness. Right now I'm flipping the pages to the chapter that we need to be on, because I didn't actually get that started. Oh, and there it goes. So as you remember, lots of poetics, attempted playing of croquet, which doesn't quite go well when you're trying to use a flamingo and a hedgehog as as croquet implements. Living croquet is kind of a challenge. Alright. So, let me just go back up. I think I'm coming into the next chapter. Oh, what? Just, no. The only thing about this, using an old device, is that you boot it up, and it keeps insisting that it wants passwords and all this other junk. I'm not very happy with Apple at this moment. But that's just me. So, yeah, crazy croquet game, and followed by a trip to the a trip to the mock turtle who
Messages. Now, Heather brings Schroeder.
shared the
perfect.
presents.
Doing curbside stuff as much as they can. IRC.
The what was I saying? The mock turtle, of course, told of his youth, and also as did the griffin. Lots of song and poetry in that one. And when we left off, the statement was made, "The trial's beginning!" And everyone went running off to the everyone is now running off to the court. The King and Queen of Hearts were sitting on their throne when they arrived, with a great crowd assembled about them, all sorts of little birds and beasts, as well as the whole pack of cards. The knave was standing before them, in chains, with a soldier on each side to guard him. And near the king was the white rabbit, with a trumpet in one hand, a scroll of parchment in the other. In the very middle of the court was a table with a large dish of tarts upon it. They looked so good that it made Alice quite hungry to look at them. "Wish they'd get the trial done," she thought. and hand round the refreshments. But there seemed to be no chance of this. So she began looking at everything about her to pass away the time. Alice had never been in a court of justice before, but she had read about them in books, and she was quite pleased to find that she knew the name of nearly everything there. "That's the judge," she said to herself, "because of his great wig." The judge, by the way, was the king, and as he wore his crown over the wig, he did not look at all comfortable, and it was certainly not becoming. "And that's the jury box," thought Alice. "And those 12 creatures." She was obliged to say creatures, you see, because some of them were animals and some were birds. "I suppose they're the jurors," she said this last word 2 or 3 times over to herself, being rather proud of it, for she thought, and rightly too, that very few little girls of her age knew the meaning of it at all. However, jurymen would have done just as well. The 12 jurors were all writing very busily on slates. "What are they doing?" Alice whispered to the Griffin. "They can't have anything to put down yet before the trial's begun." "They're putting down their names," the Griffin whispered in reply, "for fear they should forget them before the end of the trial." "Stupid things," Alice began in a loud, indignant voice, but she stopped herself hastily, for the White Rabbit cried out, "Silence in the court!" And the king put on his spectacles and looked anxiously round to make out who was talking. Alice could see, as well as if she were looking over their shoulders, that all the jurors were writing down stupid things on their slates, and she could even make out that one of them didn't know how to spell stupid, and that he had to ask his neighbor to tell him. "A nice muddle their slates will be in before the trial's over," thought Alice. One of the jurors had a pencil that squeaked. This, of course, Alice could not stand, and she went round the court and got behind him, and very soon found an opportunity for taking it away. She did it so quickly that the poor little juror, it was Bill the lizard, could not make out at all what had happened and what had become of it. So, after hunting all about for it, he was obliged to write with one finger for the rest of the day. and this was of little use, as it left no mark on the slate. "Harold, read the accusations," said the king. On this, the White Rabbit blew blasts on the trumpet, and then unrolled the parchment scroll, and read as follows. "The Queen of Hearts, she made some tarts all on a summer's day. The Knave of Hearts, he stole those tarts, and took them quite away. Consider your verdict," said the king to the jury. Not yet," the rabbit hastily interrupted. "There's a great deal to come before that." "Call the first witness," said the king, and the White Rabbit blew 3 blasts on the trumpet and called out, "First witness!" The first witness was the Hatter. He came in with a teacup in one hand and a piece of bread and butter in the other. "I beg pardon, your majesty," he began, "for bringing these in, but I hadn't quite finished my tea when I was sent for." "You ought to be finished," said the king. "When did you begin?" The Hatter looked at the March Hare, who had followed him into the court, arm in arm with the Dormouse. "14th of March, I think it was," he said. "15th, said the March Hare. 16th, added the Dormouse. "Write that down," the king said to the jury, and the jury eagerly wrote down all the 3 dates on their slates, and then added them up and reduced the answer to shillings and pence. "Take off your hat," the king said to the Hatter. "It isn't mine," said the Hatter. "Stolen!" the king exclaimed, turning to the jury, who instantly made a memorandum of the fact. "I keep them to sell," the Hatter added as an explanation. "I've none of my own. I'm a Hatter." Here the Queen put on her spectacles and began staring down at the Hatter, who turned pale and fidgeted. "Give your evidence," said the king, "and don't be nervous, or I'll have you executed on the spot." This did not seem to encourage the witness at all. He kept shifting from one foot to the other, looking uneasily at the Queen, and in his confusion he bit a large piece off of his teacup instead of the bread and butter. Just at this moment, Alice felt a very curious sensation which puzzled her a good deal until she made out what it was. She was beginning to grow larger again, and she thought at first she would get up and leave the court. But on second thought, she decided to remain where she was as long as there was room for her. "I wish you wouldn't squeeze so," said the Dormouse, who was sitting next to her. "I can hardly breathe." "Can't help it," said Alice very meekly. "I'm growing." "You've no right to grow here," said the Dormouse. "Don't talk nonsense," said Alice more boldly. "You know you're growing too." "Yes, but I grow at a reasonable pace," said the Dormouse. "Not in that ridiculous fashion." And he got up, very sulkily, and crossed over to the other side of the court. All this time, the Queen had never left off staring at the Hatter. And just as the Dormouse crossed the court, she said to one of the officers of the court, "Bring me the last of the singers from the last concert." On which the wretched Hatter trembled so that he shook both his shoes off. "Give your evidence," the king repeated angrily, "or I'll have you executed, whether you're nervous or not." "I'm a poor man, your majesty," the Hatter began in a trembling voice, "and I hadn't but just begun my tea, not above a week or so. And what of the bread and butter? What with the bread and butter getting so thin, and the twinkling of the tea..." "The twinkling of what?" said the king. "It began with the tea," the Hatter replied. "Of course twinkling begins with the tea," said the king sharply. "Do you take me for a dunce? Go on." "I'm a poor man," the Hatter went on, "and most things twinkled after that. Only the March Hare said..." "I didn't," the March Hare interrupted in a great hurry. "You did," said the Hatter. "I deny it," said the March Hare. "He denies it," said the king. "Leave out that part." "Well, at any rate, the Dormouse said..." the Hatter went on, looking anxiously round to see if he would deny it too. But the Dormouse denied nothing, being fast asleep. "After that," continued the Hatter, "I cut some more bread and butter..." "But what did the Dormouse say?" one of the jurors asked. "I can't remember." said the Hatter. You must remember, remarked the king, or I'll have you executed. The miserable Hatter dropped his teacup and bread and butter and went down on one knee. I'm a poor man, your majesty, he began. You're a very poor speaker, said the king. Here, one of the guinea pigs cheered and was very immediately suppressed by the officers of the court. As that is rather a hard word, I will explain to you how it is done. They had a large canvas bag, which tied up at the mouth with strings. Into this, they slipped the guinea pig head first, and then sat upon it. I'm glad I've seen that done, thought Alice. I've so never read in the newspapers at the end of the trials. There was some attempt at applause which was immediately suppressed by the officers of the court. And I never understood what it meant till now. If that's all you know about it, you may stand down, continued the king. I can't go on lower, said the Hatter. I'm on the floor. As it is. Then you may sit down, the king replied. Here the other guinea pig cheered and was suppressed. Come, that finishes the guinea pigs, thought Alice. Now we shall get on better. I'd rather finish my tea, said the Hatter with an anxious look at the Queen, who was reading the list of singers. You may go, said the king, and the Hatter hurriedly left the court without even waiting to put his shoes on. And just take his head off outside, the Queen added to one of the officers, but the Hatter was out of sight before the officer could get to the door. Call the next witness, said the king. The next witness was the Duchess's cook. She carried the pepper box in her hand, and Alice guessed who it was even before she got into the court, by the way the people near the door began sneezing all at once. Give your evidence, said the king. Shan't, said the cook. The king looked anxiously at the White Rabbit, who said in a low voice, Your Majesty must cross-examine this witness. Well, "If I must, ma'am," the king said with a melancholy air, and, after folding his arms and frowning at the cook till his eyes were nearly out of sight, he said in a deep voice, "What are tarts made of?" "Pepper, mostly," said the cook. "Treacle," said a tiny voice behind her. "Collar that dormouse!" the queen shrieked out. "Behead that dormouse! Turn that dormouse out of the court! Suppress him! Pinch him! Off with his whiskers!" For some minutes, the whole court was in confusion, getting the dormouse turned out, and by the time they had settled down again, the cook had disappeared. "Never mind," said the king, with an air of great relief. "Call the next witness," and he added in an undertone to the queen, "Really, my dear, you must cross-examine the next witness." "Quite makes my forehead ache." Alice watched the White Rabbit as he fumbled over the list, feeling very curious to see what the next witness would be like. "For they haven't got much evidence yet," she said to herself. Imagine her surprise when the White Rabbit read out, at the top of his shrill little voice, the name Alice! And
Smart news.
that,
Now, Davenport. At least one employee at Arconic tests
we
positive for coronavirus.
go ahead
Spokesman says,
and
attachment.
we will do chapter 12 tomorrow, at which point I will actually have my speech turned off. But I hope you all enjoyed chapter 11, and I'll see you all tomorrow. If my phone will let me
Formats. Button.
stop the video.
Finish.
There
Button.
we go.